The first real crack in the illusion didn't come from a boardroom or some performance review. It came from the janitor. His name was Leo. Sweet guy, real quiet, always wore the same faded Reds cap no matter what the weather was. That morning, he paused by my desk, eyes flicking toward the break room like something in there had teeth. You might want to grab a coffee downtown today instead, he muttered, then wheeled his mop bucket away like he hadn't just dropped a live grenade. I stood, walked down the hall, and saw Ryan holding court like a discount Tony Robbins in front of the department's leadership team. My name wasn't on the invite list. I wasn't surprised. But that was the moment I felt it, like standing on a frozen lake, hearing the first deep groan of shifting ice. 7 years of being the quiet engine behind Ravenna Analytics, and I was suddenly not even an afterthought in a meeting I used to run. People think betrayal feels like a knife. It doesn't. It's quieter. Like watching someone replace your nameplate with a smirk and a shrug. By the way, if you're listening to this and haven't subscribed yet, it'd mean a lot if you hit that button and gave the video a like. 97% of listeners never do, but it helps more than you know. And yeah, this one's about to get messy. Back then, I was still the director of operations. My title sounded cold, but my fingerprints were on everything. I didn't just build our compliance architecture. I was the architecture. I knew where the contracts were buried, how the vendor SLAs interacted with our renewal cycles, which quarterly numbers were real and which were smoke and mirrors. People like Ryan? They played golf with clients. I built the back-end systems that kept the clients. Mark, my boss, used to call me his silent scalpel. I took it as a compliment. While others chased headlines, I built pipelines. While Ryan went viral on TikTok for his dumb Finance Fridays in a bathrobe talking about crypto bubbles, I was untangling multi-million-dollar licensing knots before legal even saw them. I wasn't flashy. I was necessary. And for a while, I actually thought that meant something. At the last quarterly review, Mark told me I was irreplaceable. That was the word he used. "You're the reason we pass these audits blindfolded," he said, smiling across the conference table like I was a trusted war general. But then he added, "We just need a little more visibility in leadership, someone who can inspire the newer generation." I nodded, said nothing. But something about how he phrased it, the someone, told me the decision had already been made. The whispers had been there. Ryan shadowing Mark in those casual Friday one-on-ones, his sudden access to my strategic decks, a few missing edit logs in our shared drive. Nothing blatant, nothing I could pin down, just the weightless way things shift before a landslide. Still, I stayed late. I always stayed late. There's a particular kind of loyalty that comes from watching something grow from a skeleton crew to a mid-cap powerhouse. I remembered when our kitchen had one microwave and smelled like sadness. I remembered when the servers went down every time someone uploaded a PDF. I was there in those trenches. I didn't just build the process. I bled for it. So yeah, maybe part of me was naive. Maybe I believed that effort mattered more than nepotism. But Leo's eyes that morning, the way he wouldn't meet my gaze, that was my warning shot. And sure enough, 2 hours later, the calendar invite hit my inbox. Mandatory attendance, strategic ops leadership transition. No subject line, no context, just a room number, a start time, and the kind of silence that tells you everything. I walked in and took a seat at the edge of the room. Mark stood at the front like a man who'd rehearsed his betrayal in the mirror the night before. Ryan was next to him, beaming like a kid about to unwrap his first Ferrari. "Everyone, I'm thrilled to announce that Ryan will be stepping into the new VP of Strategic Operations role effective immediately." There it was. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, just locked eyes with Mark for half a second, long enough for him to see the lights go out behind mine. Ryan, to his credit, gave a little half bow like he was accepting an Oscar. Someone actually clapped. I think it was Leslie from marketing. She's had a crush on him since the company retreat where he drunkenly challenged the CFO to arm wrestle on a paddleboard. I stood, quietly, didn't say a word to anyone. Walked straight back to my office, typed up my resignation in 12 minutes, printed it, signed it with the same black pen I'd used to draft our last 3 compliance proposals, and walked back to the conference room. They were still talking. Ryan was making some joke about streamlining synergy or some other buzzword salad. I walked up to the front, handed the paper to Mark. He looked down at it, then at me. "Emily, what is this?" I smiled. "Congrats to Ryan." His face twitched. "Emily, is this a threat?" I held his gaze, let the silence breathe. Of course not. Then I turned and walked out. Not fast, not slow, just out. They didn't clap that time. Back at my desk, I closed the door, locked it, and sat in silence for a moment before opening my drawer and pulling out the company-issued laptop I'd never once let leave the office overnight. Not because of policy, not because I was scared someone would steal it, but because it held the veins of Ravenna's lifeblood. Every renewal schedule, every compliance timer, every operational SOP they pretended to document, but secretly let me run solo, lived there. And like most things I touched, it was neat, clean, and untraceably mine. I booted it up one last time, typed in the final admin string, and began the quiet, surgical detachment of Emily Harris from Ravenna Analytics. First, I copied the backups I was legally entitled to, templates I had created from scratch under my own name, the ones marketing liked to use without credit. Then I revoked my own biometric encryption key from the redundant authentication server, silent as a whisper. No one would notice until Ryan tried to open one of my files and got a red screen that read, "Unauthorized credential pathway." Not malicious, just clean, just unavailable. They thought I was replaceable. They didn't realize I'd already planned my exit the day Ryan posted a Monday motivation story from Mark's office, captioned, "Grind never sleeps." The same week, he accidentally pushed my system's access request to next month. Subtle. Clumsy, amateur hour. The only thing more insulting than nepotism is incompetence dressed as ambition. I logged out, took one last sip from my Ravenna-issued Yeti mug, wiped the rim, and set it upside down on the desk like a tombstone. I sent a single Slack to HR. Resignation submitted. Effective EOD today. No emoji, no sign-off. Then I walked straight into Mark's office while he was still glowing with the afterbirth pride of promoting a child who couldn't spell delegation without spell check. He looked up. "Emily, don't worry, I'm not staying to throw shade from the sidelines." I slid the printed resignation across his desk. He picked it up like it was radioactive. "You're leaving because of this?" "No, I'm leaving because you finally told me who matters here. You've been instrumental. Emily, you're not thinking clearly." I tilted my head. "On the contrary, I've never seen things more clearly." He squinted, tone softening like he thought he could still put this toothpaste back in the tube. "This is a big transition. Ryan's young, yes, but he's got energy, ideas. He's got audacity," I corrected, "and a TikTok full of compliance advice that would get us blacklisted by half our federal clients." Mark's lips pressed into a thin, corporate line. "Is this a threat?" I gave him the same look I gave auditors when they tried to bluff their way through a QMS review. "Of course not." And with that, I left the room. He didn't follow me. HR didn't stop me. No one did. The thing about being invisible is that they don't notice when you disappear, but they sure as hell notice when everything you held up starts to crumble. As I passed the finance bullpen, I caught Ryan filming another video, shirt untucked, whiteboard behind him filled with fake jargon like OPEX harmony and ROI ninja strategy. He turned mid-sentence and winked at the camera. I could hear the marketing intern giggle behind the lens. My God, they really thought this was the future. I walked past them without slowing. Past the framed awards I'd written the grant proposals for, past the new hire wall where my photo had quietly disappeared months ago, and down the elevator like I was just going for coffee. Except I wasn't coming back. On my way to the parking lot, I pulled out my phone and sent 3 emails. Not dramatic, not even threatening, just reminders. One to our ISO auditor, letting him know I'd officially transitioned out and they'd want to double-check system access logs. One to a federal vendor contact with a line about watching timelines closely this quarter. And one to a vendor support rep I'd worked with for years. It said, "You'll want to review your SLA parameters. Best, Emily." No context, just a small ripple sent into a very quiet, very strategic pond. And then I drove home. Windows down, radio off. Not angry, just done. The thing about systems like Ravenna is they forget who built the scaffolding the moment the paint dries. But scaffolding doesn't scream when it's removed. It just lets the building collapse. And collapse it would. I boxed up 7 years in less than 30 minutes. The hardest part wasn't the frame certificate from the State Department or the thank you card from the client we'd saved from a non-compliance shutdown. It wasn't even the little clay trinket my niece made for my desk, the one shaped like a blob and labeled Auntie's Superpower. No, the hardest part was the black moleskin notebook I'd kept in the second drawer down, back behind the spare dongles and security tokens. The one no one knew existed. Inside were passwords, audit triggers, vendor clause annotations, and a checklist titled, "If I Ever Leave." All caps, written 5 years ago. I opened to that page and smiled. The first item? Don't make a scene. So I didn't. HR sent Stacy, the 23-year-old generalist who'd once tried to schedule a mandatory birthday circle for my department during quarter-end close. She hovered like she was scared I'd go feral and knock over a printer. "If you could, just return the badge at the desk when you're ready," she muttered, eyes fixed firmly on a spot somewhere near my left shoulder. No eye contact. No, "Thank you for your service." Just that bureaucratic hush reserved for dangerous people and dirty laundry. I nodded once, said nothing. My silence made her fidget. From my peripheral vision, I caught the flicker of a phone screen lighting up across the floor. Then the sound, music, a voice, Ryan's voice. Hard work pays off. He grinned at the camera, twirling the company lanyard like he'd just won Survivor. "Just keep grinding, fam. Manifestation is real." Then came the worst part. He ended it with a peace sign and finger guns. Finger. Guns. The intern recording it actually squealed. No one looked in my direction. No one checked if I was still there. For all they cared, I had already vanished. I slipped my laptop, into a weathered leather bag. One I'd bought after my first Ravenna bonus. The zipper still had a catch, like it was holding its breath. I walked once more through the operations hallway. The same space where I'd trained half this company's middle management, where I'd mapped out the first compliance dashboard on a whiteboard and coded the backup sequence when IT said it wasn't possible under our license. Every contract renewal, every risk matrix, every emergency fix that saved their Q4 numbers. I carried all of it in my head, and none of them realized it was leaving. Outside, the sky was a slate gray, the kind of color that makes people think something's coming, but they don't know what. I parked 2 blocks away, pulled into a side lot facing the back of the Ravenna building, and opened my laptop. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about timing. 3 emails. First, to Andrea Mitchell, vendor compliance lead at Claris Group, one of our Tier 1 partners. The subject line was blank. The body read, "You'll want to review your SLA parameters. Best, Emily." That was all. No emotion, no breadcrumbs. Just enough to make her pause. I knew Andrea. She wasn't dumb. She'd built her department on knowing which contracts had wiggle room and which ones bit back. She'd read my message 5 times, pull up the SLA doc, and find the clause I buried 2 years ago. Continuous qualified systems oversight required for the priority compliance status. Personnel change triggers a review within 10 business days. If that clause activated, Ravenna's compliance discount dissolved. That meant a $3.2 million spike in vendor pricing. But that wasn't even the loud part. The loud part came if Andrea triggered her own internal review and found that the oversight lead, previously listed as Harris Emily, was now Ryan, who had no compliance certs, no technical clearance, and once asked me if ISO was the thing with fire drills. Clause 12.6 would kick in next. Payment freeze pending operational audit, not sabotage. Just the mechanism doing what it was built to do. Second email. A blind carbon copy to a federal procurement contact. 1 line. "Let me know if I can help ease your Q2 continuity concerns." That would be enough. They'd already been antsy about Ravenna's youthful strategic hires, especially after Ryan flubbed a call last month and called the FAR handbook ancient. The guy said, TLDR to a compliance director. I thought the man was going to stroke out. Third and final email went to myself. A reminder, a warning, a mantra. You are not their safety net anymore. I closed the lid, and for the first time in 7 years, I exhaled fully. Not because I was free, but because I'd remembered what I built, alone, thanklessly, invisibly, and now someone else would have to figure out how to keep it standing. And when it started to buckle, no one could say I hadn't walked away quietly. No slammed doors, no hissy fit, just a calm woman with a bag, a plan, and a deep understanding of where the real power always lived. It didn't even take a full week. 5 business days after I left, Ravenna's building hosted its quarterly ISO compliance review, one of the big ones too, not just a routine desk audit. This was an on-site spot check with Janelle Godfrey, the kind of lead auditor who could spot a forged timestamp like a hawk spotting a field mouse. She once failed a partner firm for mislabeling a backup certificate by a single hour. I got a heads up from a friend on the inside. Sarah, payroll and risk, still loyal, still smart enough to keep quiet. She sent me a text that just said, "Audit started," Ryan sweating through his suit. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But I did put my phone down and make a fresh cup of coffee. Meanwhile, inside that glass conference room on the 3rd floor, Ryan was trying to explain why our chain of custody documentation hadn't been updated since, well, me. I used to keep those records printed, bound, and mirrored across 3 secure nodes, one on-site, one off-site, and one in the encrypted cloud container registered under my private compliance LLC, the one with a 2-factor biometric key. Problem was, no one had ever asked where those backups were hosted, because for 7 years, I'd just made the problems disappear. Ryan, bless his mediocrity, started with the worst possible line. "We're consolidating systems." Janelle didn't blink. Meaning what? He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling as if operational documentation floated in HVAC vents. "We're moving from a siloed architecture to a more agile framework." "Fascinating," she said, her tone slicing the air. "Can you show me the original SOC2 log from April of last year? The one tied to Claris Group's integration?" Ryan clicked, then clicked again, then opened a folder labeled Archive Emily Batch Final V3. Nothing, just a shortcut link. Broken. From what I was told, he tried to stall, said the prior systems had poor documentation, and they were in the process of replatforming for Q4. That was a bold strategy, because the ISO handbook had a clear requirement. Evidence of operational continuity must be accessible at time of audit, not retroactively produced. Janelle asked a second time, "Where's the audit trail for March through July of this year?" Ryan, now visibly panicking, opened our SharePoint. Tried to locate the quarterly review doc I used to generate automatically every 90 days. But the scheduled job had failed, because I hadn't been there to run it, and no one had transferred the necessary admin credentials. OneDrive folder was titled Emily Legacy Do Not Delete. Inside were a bunch of .zip files and placeholders labeled Ask EM. I hadn't named them that. Someone else had. When asked directly, he said, "We're still mapping access to legacy infrastructure." Janelle nodded, wrote something down, and calmly requested a copy of the access logs for the compliance dashboard Ryan had boasted about during onboarding. He gave her a file. She asked, "What about the off-site logs?" Ryan blinked. "The backups," she clarified. "Where are they physically located?" He blinked again. With IT?" She asked if he could provide a signed attestation from the IT lead confirming that. He promised to circle back. Word began to spread. Anxiety hung in the air like the smell of burnt coffee, lingering, bitter, and impossible to ignore. Staff started whispering in the kitchen again. People asked where I went. HR told them I'd moved on to new opportunities, but someone in ops said they saw me having coffee with someone from Ilaris Group, the same competitor circling Ravenna's biggest client like a vulture with a spreadsheet. By end of day, 3 systems had thrown certificate errors. The compliance dashboard showed a big red exclamation mark under Access Chain Verification, Incomplete. Mark's phone pinged. He ignored it. Then it pinged again. He opened the message and stared at the screen. A forwarded note from Janelle herself. "We'll need to escalate this to a formal review." That meant holding payments. That meant reviewing contracts. That meant red tape. And suddenly, for the first time, it hit them. Emily didn't just work within the system. Emily was the system. And now, the system had quietly signed out. It started as a whisper in the break room. "Did you see that audit summary?" Then, from the dev pit, "Wait, who set up that backup architecture again?" And finally, from a junior in IT, "Who even owns the node we're pinging for the compliance mirror?" 1 week without me, and the company was already circling the drain, not in fire and chaos, but in quiet confusion, a slow rot. A series of locked doors with no keys, blind spots no one even knew were there until they were forced to squint. The IT manager, Dennis, finally pulled up the dashboard for Ravenna's off-site compliance environment. He expected it to show Ravenna Secure O2. That was the label Ryan had referenced in the all hands when he promised total continuity through transition. What it actually showed was each operations gateway. A. Emily Harris. He clicked into the node details, hoping it was just a naming convention issue. Then he saw the license trail. Harris Operations, LLC, External Compliance Consultant. The date of origination, March 3rd, 2019. Updated regularly by me. Last access, the morning I resigned. Dennis leaned back in his chair and muttered something that sounded a lot like, "Oh, hell." He screenshotted everything, sent it to Mark. Mark, who'd spent the morning in back-to-back fire drills with legal and trying to explain to Janelle why the company's primary audit trail was a corrupted OneDrive folder filled with Ryan's LinkedIn drafts, opened the email and stopped breathing for a second. Because there it was. The quiet truth. They didn't inherit a system. They inherited an empty shell, and the only person who knew how to refill it was already gone. The panic didn't look like yelling or finger-pointing yet. It looked like Mark dialing my number 6 times in 1 hour. No voicemail, no response. Then an email. Subject: Need to discuss ASAP. Body: Emily, I believe there's been some confusion around the compliance architecture. Would appreciate a quick call to align on continuity strategy. He signed it, "Warm regards," as if I hadn't watched him hand a promotion to a TikTok trust fund with a buzzword addiction. He didn't expect the bounce back. "This inbox is no longer monitored. Not under obligation to respond. Good luck, Mark." That was it. 1 sentence. Clean, cold, perfect. He stared at it long enough for his phone to fall asleep in his hand. The next day, someone in HR asked who was responsible for onboarding Ryan into the compliance systems. Stacy, the same HR generalist who couldn't look me in the eye during my exit, quietly admitted no formal handoff had taken place. Another whisper. "Why didn't we document this better?" Another one. Did she ever document it? And then, finally, the one no one wanted to say out loud. Was Emily the only one who knew how this worked? The answer was yes. And it wasn't by accident. It wasn't malicious either, just efficient. While the others were busy with town halls and feel-good graphics about cultural synergy, I was stitching together frameworks that actually passed audits. No one offered help. No one asked questions. They just relied. It worked, so they stopped looking. Until it stopped working. And now? Janelle's team had paused their review. The ISO body had flagged Ravenna for potential material gaps in operational continuity. Payments were on hold, clients were waiting, and the one woman who knew where the real systems were buried had already changed her number. That's when the reversal started to click into place. Not through some dramatic revelation, but through the quiet realization that the person they'd treated as background noise was the only one who'd ever been playing music. And now, silence. He picked the worst place imaginable. One of those fake rustic coffee shops with Edison bulbs, reclaimed wood tables, and $12 pour-overs that taste like regret and grapefruit. Mark was already seated at the back corner table when I arrived, nervously stirring his tea like it was a cauldron that might predict his future. He wore the same light blue button-down he always used for damage control meetings. Rolled up at the sleeves like that somehow made him seem more human. I didn't sit right away. I let him squirm for 3 seconds longer than was polite, then pulled out the chair and set my phone face down on the table, a quiet signal that I wasn't here to catch up. "Emily," he said, trying for warmth but landing somewhere between desperate and exhausted. "I appreciate you coming." I nodded. No smile. Let him talk. "We're in a bit of a tight spot," he began, then immediately chuckled like we were both in on some inside joke. "I won't pretend everything's been handled perfectly." "You won't have to," I said. That shut him up for a beat. He cleared his throat. "Look, we both know you built something really valuable. The systems, the audits, the whole compliance structure, it was brilliant. Truly. No one's disputing that." I waited. We underestimated how integrated you were into everything. That's on us. On me, really." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And I think, out of respect for the company, for what we built together, maybe you could—" "Respect," I said, interrupting him with the softness of a scalpel. "Has to be mutual." He blinked. "Thrown. I know what you meant." I folded my hands. "You meant, come save the mess you let a frat pledge light on fire, quietly, with a smile, for the good of the team. The same team that let me walk out the front door without a single acknowledgement." "Emily, it's not like that." "No?" I tilted my head. "Then tell me what it is like, Mark. Because from my side of the table, it looks like I spent 7 years building a spine for this company, and you swapped me out for someone who uses synergy as a verb." He tried to recover. "Ryan's young, eager. Maybe he wasn't ready for full transition." "He wasn't ready for a login screen," I cut in. "And now you want me to stitch the body back together? For what? A LinkedIn shout-out? A Starbucks gift card from HR?" His mouth opened, then closed. Nothing came out. So I decided to make it easier for him. "I'm not sabotaging you, Mark," I said, tone even, surgical. "I didn't take anything. I didn't shut anything down. I didn't trip any wires." He gave a cautious nod, like that surprised him. "You're not bleeding because I cut you," I said. "You're bleeding because you built the whole damn house on scaffolding you never bothered to understand, and now you're watching it sway." That was when I reached into my bag and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. I slid it across the table. "What's this?" "Conflict of interest disclosure," I said. "I'm consulting now, with Alaris Group." His face went slack. I let it sink in. "You've got a renewal meeting with Sterling and Hodge next month. They're Alaris's now." He picked up the paper with shaking hands, scanning the clause at the bottom. It was all legal, all clean. Nothing he could contest. No non-compete violation, no foul play. Just a quiet declaration that I now advised the firm his biggest client was defecting to. Why would you do this?" he asked, the color draining from his face. I stared at him for a moment, letting the silence hang. Then I leaned in just enough to speak low. "This wasn't a threat, Mark. It was a mirror." And with that, I stood. He didn't stop me, didn't plead, just sat there, staring down at the paper like it was a map to his own obsolescence. I walked out into the late autumn air, coat unbuttoned, wind sharp against my face. No title, no company badge, no team waiting at my desk. But I'd never felt more in control. The subject line hit their inbox at 7:42 a.m. Ravenna Analytics, federal renewal status deferred. No exclamation points, no threats, just that one word, deferred. Inside, the body of the message from the audit board was short. Due to inconsistencies in system documentation, lack of traceable oversight, and unverified chain of custody logs, Ravenna's federal vendor renewal had been placed in a 90-day review window, during which no new funds would be released. $22 million. Frozen. Ryan was still 26, but he looked 43 by the time the first emergency meeting ended, hair tousled, tie askew, sweat rings blooming like ink blots under his armpits. He tried to sound confident. We just need to compile the backup logs and clarify points of contact with our vendor partners. Should be no issue once we reauthorize access. But he didn't have access. IT couldn't locate the mirror node. Legal flagged a potential conflict with the license holder. Finance whispered, "How did no one catch this?" And then the second shoe dropped. Andrea Mitchell from Claris Group, the vendor I had emailed with a polite warning, formally triggered SLA Clause 12.6 compliance suspension. All transactions pending audit were placed under review with late payment penalties clocking in by the hour, another $22 million at stake with interest. When the CFO saw it, she asked Ryan, flat out, "Did you know this clause existed?" Ryan stammered something about looking into it and legacy systems and external input. But everyone already knew. The only external input that ever mattered had walked out the door 2 weeks ago with a single resignation letter and no scene. That afternoon, Mark canceled his meetings. Rumor was he took 3 Xanax and stared out the office window for an hour without blinking, which made the next moment even more surreal. Because while they unraveled behind closed doors, I was seated 2 buildings down in a climate-controlled glass office on the 18th floor of the Alaris Group headquarters. No nameplate, no ceremony, just my laptop, a stack of legal pads, and 3 men in tailored suits sitting across the table as I flipped through a folder labeled Sterling and Hodge Migration Timeline. The meeting had been in the works for months, quietly, strategically, but today was final walkthrough day. I wore black. No symbolism, just professionalism. They offered me coffee. I declined. One of the execs leaned over and said, "You're sure their system won't autocorrect in time?" I flipped to the next page, showed the diagram. Not unless they've duplicated the compliance gateway, which they haven't. They think they did. But it's a shell mirror. No live triggers. No verification token. He nodded. "So we're greenlit to onboard Sterling next quarter?" "Earlier," I said, closing the folder. And just like that, it was done. $22 million in limbo at Ravenna. $36 million inbound to Alaris. I didn't smile, didn't smirk, just gathered my notes, shook hands, and walked into the hallway toward the elevators. As I waited for the doors to open, I saw a figure moving through the lobby across the glass sky bridge. Mark. He didn't see me. He was walking fast, shoulders hunched, phone pressed to his ear like a lifeline. His face had that pale, brittle look, like someone clenching against the truth they swore would never come. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside, pressed lobby, and watched the numbers drop. No gloating, no drama, just vindication. Clean, absolute, and irreversible. The systems I built had never needed revenge. They only needed time. And Ravenna? Well, Ravenna had just run out of it. The first red flag was so small it almost slipped past IT's radar. A failed login attempt on the compliance dashboard at 1:14 a.m., flagged as unauthorized credential pattern, anomaly detected. Ryan had tried to brute force his way in with outdated admin codes he must have found in an old spreadsheet labeled something asinine like super user access final 2. It locked him out on the second try. Then it triggered a protocol I'd built 4 years ago, rotating encryption keys tied to a biometric token stored on a proprietary YubiKey, mine, programmed by me, registered under my consulting LLC. At the time, I'd pitched it as zero-fail fallback protection in the event of a breach. Everyone clapped. No one documented it. Because why would they? Emily always handled it. Now, Emily was gone, and the doors she'd built were closing in slow, steady clicks. Ryan showed up at the server room in a frenzy, eyes bloodshot, shirt untucked, talking too loud for someone whose voice was normally all influencer polish and startup swagger. He demanded Dennis from IT escalate the block. Dennis just shook his head. "Emily built this around her own identity chain," he said. "If we bypass it, The whole system could corrupt. Then uncorrupt it, Ryan snapped. Dennis didn't reply, just pulled up the node architecture again and pointed at the bottom corner of the screen. See that? He said. Encrypted biometric shell. Rotates every 72 hours unless renewed by the primary device. And no one else has the renewal key. Ryan stared at it, jaw twitching. So you're saying we can't get in? Dennis shrugged. Not unless we find her thumb. By noon, the auditors had flagged the system officially. Insufficient operational continuity, evidence of non-transferable key dependencies. That's audit speak for you screwed yourselves. HR was called. Legal followed. By 4:00 p.m., Mark released a 2-line internal memo. Effective immediately, Ryan Lawson will be stepping down from his role as VP of Strategic Operations. We thank him for his service. The words service and strategy had never sounded so hollow. Ryan didn't clear his desk. He didn't even return his badge. One of the interns found it tossed into a trash bin in the parking garage, still attached to the lanyard I'd once designed for Internal Compliance Awareness Week. As for Mark, he didn't issue a second memo. He didn't show up at all the next day, or the day after that. The rumor was he'd checked himself into a private clinic in Vermont for stress-related cardiac symptoms. The truth was probably simpler. He just couldn't face a company unraveling thread by thread from knots he never understood. The systems were still technically online, but nothing worked the way it was supposed to. The triggers were silent. The alerts were turned off. And the only person who could explain how to realign it all was now sitting in a different office, under a different nameplate, answering to executives who actually listened. I never gloated. Not once. Never posted some passive-aggressive status update on LinkedIn. Never returned their emails even when the subject line changed from urgent to just a quick favor to please Emily. I didn't need to slam the door on them. They'd already sealed themselves in. All I did was walk away with the keys. And when you build the locks, you don't have to shout. You just listen for the silence that follows. The table was longer than the one at Ravenna. Polished walnut. Real wood. Not that synthetic laminate they swore was just as good. Across from me sat a man I'd watched for nearly a decade from the corner of quarterly review meetings, always buttoned up, always vaguely polite, and always too busy to remember the names of the people holding his company together. Mark Weston, CEO of Ravenna Analytics. He didn't look like a CEO today. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His tie was slightly askew, and there was a small stain on the cuff of his shirt. Coffee, maybe, or whatever passes for comfort when you're watching your empire bleed out. Between us, a folder. Inside, the transition documents confirming Ilaris Group's acquisition of Sterling and Hodge, the contract Ravenna had been depending on to stay solvent through Q4, their largest client. Now ours. I said nothing at first. Just let him sit with it. Let the weight of the silence press into that brittle space between ego and regret. He finally broke. Emily, he said, voice low, measured, as if the right tone might turn this into a negotiation instead of a reckoning. We don't want things to be adversarial. I raised an eyebrow. They aren't. He glanced at the folder, then back to me. We'd like to know what it would take to bring you back, as a consultant, a partner. Hell, we'll rename the role if we have to. I kept my voice even. You already gave away what mattered. He blinked. Which is my respect. The moment held, just long enough to taste. I reached into my bag, pulled out a thin document, and slid it across the table. It stopped an inch from his hand. He stared at it like it might explode. It's a non-disclosure agreement, I said. Standard. Mutual terms. You sign it, and this room stays off the record. No leaks, no headlines, no spin. His fingers hovered over the edge. So this is it? This is me, I said, finishing clean. He nodded slowly, eyes dimming as he flipped through the pages. He didn't ask for revisions, he didn't argue. He just signed. Because what else could he do? His company had bled out from 1,000 quiet cuts. Not sabotage, not theft. Just the absence of the one person who actually knew where the arteries were. When he handed the pen back, I stood. The room felt warmer now, or maybe just smaller. He looked up. Not like a CEO, not like a boss. Just a man trying to understand how he got here. I never meant to push you out, he said quietly. I paused, met his eyes. I know. I turned to leave. But before I reached the door, I stopped. One hand on the frame, one final breath. This wasn't a threat, Mark, I said. It was a mirror. And then I left. Calm, certain, no badge to return, no email to check, no apologies to offer. Just silence and the sound of a table that no longer belonged to him.